Hello. Not either. Don't feel bad.
I've been busy all
Yeah, the owl's working. That's why. Can it see me over here?
I don't know, I can't see.
Oh, good. Then we have this handy dandy owl thing to follow you everywhere you go. Except you'll be doing it that way.
Can you guys see us okay?
Talking to the online people.
You see us okay online?
Hey, that's great, we got it. My name's up there. My name's up there.
Got a silly conversation.
What's it say again?
Oh,
my.
It's an error.
I didn't bring these. I actually asked John.
I'm TK, thank you for coming, we got a lot of new faces here, love seeing that. It's, Arthur does an outstanding job, with the net. Cheese and Brews is at Analytics, a brewery, which is up in Lexington area. It'll be the second Wednesday of the month. Our next meeting is, Jim Wellwood, he's gonna be talking about inspection, he's our state inspector for this area. He may or may not be your state inspector, but pretty much he's kind of in this area is where he's at. He'll be talking. Let's see, the hives, as I think most of you are finding, it's been a very swarmy year. They just have been very, very prolific in that, and, I've seen 12, I've got 10 of them, and I saw 2 of them leave. Well, one I caught, and then they left after that, and just left the queen and like that many little bees. So yeah, so just keep your eyes open and be aware they are extremely, all these hives were split within that. We were in the hives on Monday, yesterday. And again, anybody is welcome to come out to the club hive. The FMA is been delivered in the box. I didn't know that, John Hill from Hilco Bee said he's making up his own style of FMA type style hive that will be out soon. Which I would have bought one of those. So we've got an FMA. So again, we've got different types of hives for you to look at. We've got a tough bar hive, a long hive, a polystyrene hive. Well, I put in the FMA. So again, anytime, and just let me know you're gonna be there, just because weather sometimes has its own mind. And there's, so it's a type of, it's kind of a hot item where it's a, how would you describe it? Kind of a plastic.
External plastic insulated hive, and the internals are insulated.
Was that the one that looks like a bunch of coolers and they lock
Yeah.
together?
Yeah.
$600 for a set.
Yeah, well, close to that. Close to that way. So we'll have one, and again, sometimes you want to look at things touchy feely before you make that $700 commitment. And that's part of what we're doing. But John said he was developing one. He thought it'd be a few months away. Said it'd be 20 to 30% less, which would be helpful. But again, getting that, so you are welcome to come out and just say, hey, I want to. Because we've got some that, at the top are, it's a pretty high, it's a tough management. The polystyrene has its pros and cons, so there's pros and cons, whether 10s or 8s or mediums or deeps, and all sorts of pros and cons. But this is a way, an opportunity that you can come out, and I've had I've had some people who've never touched a hive before, was out there Monday. I've had some that came out and helped us some days. So again, we'll have a variety, and the idea is, not so much getting work out of you as taking time. Okay, here's a frame. This is what a queen looks like. This is what you're looking for. Here's a way of going through your hive. Again, because sometimes if you've never touched one, it's kind of, do I really want to get into it? And that's what our club hives are about.
And you'll learn a lot more with a bunch of hives than you will with one.
Yeah, and yeah, Cindy.
How many hives did you start out with that made you 10 swarms?
Well, okay, the club had 6 out of 7 over winter. Those clubs hives. My hives, I had 9 out of 11 over winter. And so some are coming from the club, some I'm pretty sure are coming from the club, because they're going from from me to John. That's where I'm seeing them, and they've been very cooperative in that they've been down here. Yeah, they're cooperative. The one that went up the tree, one of the first ones went into a tree, luckily, it's a honey locust, in other words, a pokey, and it was about 20 feet up. But that was the tree I was planning on taking down anyway, so it went down the road. And they stayed there, and I collected them, and they had 2 more swarms right there, and then it's like from here to there in my house. So, some from my hive, some are from the club hives, and all of them have been split, but they have been extremely swarmy, it seems. How many of you would agree with that? All right, so, so that's what we've got going on, and again, we are a pretty open group. We've got a nice Facebook group that is pretty questionable, and we've got a lot of people who are willing to mentor, so again, so that's part of what beekeeping support is, and that's what our organization is about. All right, so, Mr. Art.
Yes.
He is fantastic. He is extremely knowledgeable. He talks here on me, and I kind of like.
He's way overselling me.
But the way you present it is very professional as that. All right, so, Arthur.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I will explain, I'm not winking at you because I think James is cute. I had a detached retina about a month ago, and so I'm still recovering from that, so I'm seeing double and stuff, so I tend to favor this side. So, anyway, what'd you say?
2 Jameses?
Yeah, 2 James, sorry.
That's
Sorry.
Scary thought.
But,
One, please.
but as you can see on the screen, so James is gonna help me out tonight, as is Mr. Mike Lavaza in the back. I think many of you know Mike. He's sitting back there in the red shirt.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, there he is.
and really the way I'd like to, I guess, set this thing up is more of a conversation as opposed to a presentation, because I think it, when you're talking about things like hives, pests and diseases and things like that, there's a lot of knowledge in the room. So just look forward to hearing everyone's perspective and what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, and hope we have an action or a knowledge filled night. How to advance this, Tom?
Just tap the screen.
Sure.
Slide your finger toward you, maybe.
Stay alive.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna start with everyone's favorite pest, varroa destructor. And, one thing I think about the varroa mite is I think the national average, nationally, nationally, I think the varroa last statistic that I saw accounts for somewhere around 37% of annual hives. And, it gets better because in Illinois, that number is around 46%. So just thinking about what a big challenge, issue, problem of varroa mite is, as you think about everything out there, in my mind, it's clearly one of the most significant. So the first slide just went through a bit of history around the varroa mite. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but this life cycle slide is one that's pretty interesting. Oh, thank you.
Can you see that?
Yep.
The arrow?
So, I always like this because this slide kind of gives me the EBGs a little bit when you think about it. So, so what happens is the queen bee lays an egg, the egg hatches into a larva. When the larva is in its cell before it's capped clearly, you have a pregnant varroa mite female enter into that cell. Once she's in that cell, once the cell is capped, she starts feeding on the larva. Well, what she does then is she lays 4 eggs. If it's a drone cell, she's gonna lay 5 eggs. Or 5 eggs or 6 eggs, I'm sorry. One of those eggs is gonna be male, the other eggs are gonna be female. So these things sexually mature really quickly. And so the one male egg is gonna hatch. And while they're still within the cell, he's gonna mate with those other females. So he's mating with his sisters in that cell. So then when they emerge, you had 1 mite go in, and you're either gonna have 5 mites come out of a worker cell or 6 mites come out of a drone cell. And just if you think about that, that's how quickly and how easily you can get varroa mite levels quickly out of control in your hive. So I remember early on, I used to think about, well, how the heck does varroa spread so quickly? And I mean, that's how it happens. So it doesn't take very long. You get a couple of cycles of brood through there with that type of activity going on, and before you know it, you got some pretty major problems. Questions, thoughts, comments?
I got a question. How long does the mite itself live? So from the day it's born until the day it dies? Did you say
I knew that at one time and I forgot.
6 days, 100?
I may remember in 30 minutes, but I can't remember right now. Do you have a question or you just judge it? Okay.
Well, okay, does she mate more than, does she lay eggs more than one time?
Yes, she will. Yep, so she will go into multiple cells. All right, so this slide just talks about the whole concept of integrated pest management, just meaning, don't do just one thing. So thinking about different types of approaches. So I know one of the things that some beginning beekeepers do is they do one thing and they find out that it works, and so they keep doing that same thing over and over and over again. And one thing that you learn about varroa mites is they are extremely adaptive. And so what I always try to do is I always try to change my treatment rotations up. So if I need to treat in the spring, I'm rarely, if ever, I try not to say never, I rarely, if ever, use that same treatment in the summer if I need to treat, or in the fall. So if I have to treat in the spring, I'm treating with something. If I have to treat in the summer, I'm doing something different. If I treat in the fall, I'm doing something even different. I think one of the most important things when it comes to managing mites is regular mite washes. And I know it's intimidating early on because you think, oh, I'm going to catch the queen and I'm going to kill her. But it's one of those things you got to get comfortable with. Just regular mite washes. If you want to do, I always do alcohol. Some people prefer sugar, the sugar rolls, which we'll talk about here a little bit later. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, well, you have to do this or you have to do that. I would just say find something that you're comfortable with and start there. I'd much rather someone use a sugar roll method or even a sticky board method. Just have something in place as opposed to be intimidated by alcohol and then find yourself not doing anything at all. You'll see there the goal is to consistently keep levels below 5% infestation. Once you hit that 5% mark, I start getting really, really nervous once I hit that mark. And so I've got a slide a little bit later kind of showing the different levels of infestation, how you can maybe think about that and approach that differently so that you don't hit that 5% mark. And then one thing that I remember reading about years ago, this small cell comb, and what the concept there was is that you get this, you buy this foundation where the size of the comb is smaller. And the theory was, well, it's not big enough for a mite to get in there and do what a mite does, but it's a mite. And so everything that I've read, I put Google Scholar on there because I read a peer review article on Google Scholar And it proved that that small cell comb approach to controlling varroa mites wasn't effective. And I'll just stop there and make a plug for Google Scholar. So I didn't know about this until I was going through my master beekeeper class with the University of Montana. So one of the things that we had to use for our research projects was Google Scholar. And if you go and, just type into your search engine bar, Google Scholar brings it up. And what it does is every article out there is peer reviewed. And so it's not just, Arthur writing an article and posting it out there on Google somewhere, but it's actually peer reviewed. And so very scientific in nature and really reliable information. So that might be something you just want to make a note for if you ever curious about going out there, looking for some information on whatever the topic might be. I watch YouTube videos and blogs and all that kind of stuff, just like everyone else. But I like to go to Google Scholar and try to back some of that information up when I can.
Arthur, it looked like you're getting ready to pick the next slide.
Yeah.
I'm Rob. Hi.
Rob?
I had a couple questions here. On the third bullet point down under practices where it says DSH stock,
Yes.
what is that?
So, great question. And that's one of the reasons that Mike is here, actually. So VSH stock is varroa sensitive hygienic, a stock. And, we're gonna talk about that a little bit because Mike's forgotten more about VSH stock and all the genetics than I'll ever know. So Mike, you want to talk about that a little bit now?
Yeah, so it's a mechanism where bees have the ability, they think it's based on pheromone or smell to know if there's a reproductive mite in the cell. And then they have various mechanical mechanisms like their chewing behavior will untap the cell and that'll interrupt the mite reproductive cycle. Will pull the larva out, throw it out the front of the hive to get rid of it. And then those immature mites don't have a chance to fully mature when they emerge. And then they'll kind of disrupt the cycle. So there are ways you can test and check for that. You have a brain or cat brood and you can see that there's holes and you can see the larva. That's an indicator that they're chewing or something wrong with that larva. You can pull those out. I carry tweezers in my tool belt. You'll pull them out and look to see if there's a reproductive mite. So that, that's the mechanism that we do also. So like Tom and I have breeder queens that are buy for that stock, and so they have that. So the mom has it. And then we instrumentally inseminate the process between them, make sure we have a high concentration of that. So that anything that you're getting, when Tom has that is at least on the mom, and then it's open mated. So that, I don't know what else you want me to kind of talk about. That's how they handle it, and they do other things too, like most of the bees are pretty sensitive to the chalk brood and any kind of brood disease that you'll have. But there's a UVO test that's pretty new, it's like a sick brood pheromone that you inject in there and then you test to see if the workers go and clean those sick ones out. So that's another way that you can kind of test. That's not the same thing as varroa sensitive identity behavior, it's another mechanism where they sense the brood is sick, remove it. And then find that those bees that chew and eat that brood out, they get sick and they just kind of fly off and you have to stop.
So it's a trait that the bees have, and it's highly, we select for it. So you do testing across colonies.
Yeah.
You kind of inbreed that trait to try and get that. It's kind of like seeking brown hair or something like that, or green eyes or something like that. It's a trait that these bees have and you breed for it.
I mean, for someone like me, I just have the bees that I have, it's ones that I catch, like, it just is what it is.
Kind of, you can buy like a cell or a queen or a virgin, the mom for sure has it. So you at least have, like, when she lays an egg, 50% of the genetics will have that. And depending on what drone she mates with, you might have a higher concentration.
Another thing I saw there is removal of drone brood. Are you suggesting that we should be removing all?
Yeah, so I'm glad you did that. So it's a couple, so I'll say a couple of things about that and Mike and Tom jump in there as well. So one of the methods that there is for trying to control varroa mites is to intentionally generate more drone brood. So you all have seen those green drone cones. So you let the queen lay those up. And because mites are more drawn to the drone larva because it has a longer incubation period, they choose that before they choose worker larva. So you wait until that, comb is capped, then you pull it out, put it in the freezer, let it freeze for 24, 48 hours, and then put it back in the hive, and they'll clean it out. So that's a method of mite control, or, yeah, mite control. The downside to that is that, you know, if you're like me, time gets away from you. And then what happens is you have a mite bomb in your hive. The other thing is that, you know, I never encourage anyone to completely get rid of drones. I mean, drones are important. I remember years and years ago, any drone come out, I was knocking that stuff off of there. But, you know, if you think about this varroa sensitive hygienic trait that Mike has talked about, because the drone comes from an unfertilized egg, those drones are gonna be 100% VSH trait. And those drones that are 100% VSH trait are gonna be out there open mating with the queens that are flying around. So I think that's a good thing. So it is a method of mite control, but we also want and need to have drones in our hive and in the population so that we get good mated queens, and hopefully good mated queens with the genetics that we would like to see. So any comments on that? Mike, Tom?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, like, it's a mechanical way to deal with, it's a non-chemical way to handle mites. Another thing that we'll often do is you just take a medium draw comb and put it in a deep slot, and they'll draw a drone comb on the bottom of it. And once that drone comb's capped, you can just pull it outside the hive and scrape it off. So it's another way you can mechanically help with the hive, and it can be hard to get them to draw that drone comb and use it. I don't know why. I just have phobia with the greener, but you know, that can be very difficult to get them to draw and use that drone comb appropriately. I've had better luck actually using mediums than the deeps. But I run drone comb in almost everything because I want tons of good drones from our stock out for the hive and for everything they make, so.
Hey, Mike, explain that, the medium frame there.
Yeah, so you just take, you've got a deep box, so you know that it's only 6 1/4 inches, whereas a deep frame is 9 1/8 or 9 1/4, I forget the numbers. You have a drawn medium piece of comb, or even a medium with this foundation in it, you just drop that into your deep box in one of the slots, and they don't like having space in between brood frames, so you put it in between 2 brood frames, and they'll fill that bottom, that medium, right on the bottom of the wood, they'll just draw a comb on the bottom of it. And it's almost always drone comb, at least the majority of it. But another nice thing about doing that is they're not gonna ruin your other. Don't make drones, they want them to or not. They'll take the beautiful, nice foundation and ruin it. Like drone comb. So that's a way to give them like a relief valve to make drones down there. And the nice thing about using the medium is literally you can just pull that medium frame out and have like a web of comb on the bottom of it. You take your high spoon and scrape across the bottom. All that brood is gone, drop it back in there, just keep doing that every 3-4 weeks, you can do that.
And here I thought I was just screwing up when I did that.
I started doing it on the Valley Special, I would just be throwing coins and frames wherever. They really like to do that, I like giving them that space, so I'll just write drone on the top of them. I do it just so I have drones, I don't get rid of the drones, because I need to catch them and use them for different things, so.
I think it's very important that you heard it say clearly, it goes between 2 drawn frames, otherwise they'll make a mess.
Yeah, we want it to be 2 cat brood frames or open brood.
So put a medium in between 2 deep frames,
Correct.
otherwise they'll cross the bars and just make a jump. I think one other thing I'll add, not necessarily about drones, like everything you're gonna hear that Arthur's talking about is with pest management is, it's always a layered approach. There's no one that's a silver bullet, and like this is the one thing that's gonna fix it all. It's a combination of one or all or a handful of these things. And you may find that some of this works for you and some of this doesn't work for you. You gotta figure that out, but layer on a bunch of this stuff. So don't just count on a chemical mite treatment. Don't just trust on genetics. Don't just trust on drone removal or powdered sugar shakes or something like that. A combination of all of it.
Thanks, Tom. Anything
Actually, other than just the thing that I was sitting here thinking is, whenever you're looking at the IPM aside from the borough sensitive hygiene, that drone, removing those drones are one of the most effective things that you can do because if that mite has the choice of going into a worker cell or a drone cell, it will go into the drone cell. Absolutely, because it's drawn to those pheromones because they know they're gonna get more, offspring by doing that. And so if you've got mites in that hive, and whenever a mite, you've talked about earlier that the mites, that they do reproduce more than once, they are known to go back into a cell within 2 days. So people who do oxalic acid, vaporization, you have to do it like every 2 to 3 days because what happens is those mites come out of that cell and they go back in the next available cell within about 2 days. And so getting back to that, removing those drones, that's gonna knock out a lot of money.
So I see you debunked the powdered sugar thing, which I'm glad about, because I just tried it the other day and it's, wow, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was doing it and this is stupid, I don't want to do it. So it's nice to see that you said that. But I do have a question. I watched the David Burns video regarding this kind of stuff. He talked about breaking the brood cycle. But you didn't mention that here. Is that just not a thing or?
So, I mean, that's another approach. I didn't mention it here just because, like, when I've done this in the past, there have been a large number of newer beekeepers in the audience. And so when you think about, at least in my opinion, this is my opinion, others in here may have different things, and feel free to express them. I try to think about, what am I most likely to do? Or what is a newer beekeeper most likely to do? And so a lot of things that you'll see me talk about here in the coming slides are some of those, more effective, but more simple things. Because if I had to try to rely on breaking the brood cycle, the chances of me doing that are probably lower than me doing some of these things regularly. And so I want to do what's going to give me the most chance of one success and the most likelihood that I'm going to do it. So that's why I don't typically talk about breaking the brood cycle. But
Like,
other things.
Well, and one of the other things too is if you're interested in making some honey, if you're breaking the brood cycle periodically through the year, you're virtually not gonna make much honey. Whenever it really gets down to it, there's kind of two primary things. Some people like to make honey, some people like to make bees. And making the bees, you can do that brood break thing because you're gonna be making splits, you're gonna have a lot of small hives that you're gonna have those brood breaks, and so that's gonna help you in your pest management that way. But if you're one of these people like Cynthia and myself, we make honey. And if I'm gonna make honey, I'm not gonna break the brood cycle this time of year. It'd be crazy for me to do it because that hive's not gonna be near as much honey.
In Europe, it's in like France, it's getting more and more popular because they don't have the ability to use as many chemicals. So once they're dirt bits, they catch the queen, they have these cages they put on, and then they wait 21 days and they start to lay baby. Well, that's how they break the brood cycle. So that's what they're saying. Are you comfortable grabbing your queen, put her in a cage, snap her in the frame? Most new beekeepers aren't comfortable touching, putting and doing things. So that'd be one of the things you have to, that's how they do it. With Richard Mole, like he's in Brittany, he's got some good videos and shows how they do it. They use all wax, but these special cages that go on the top of the frame, so they just leave them year round. They catch the queen, they put her in there, it's a pretty big area. She just runs around in there and they wait 14 days or 15 days, when they hit them on the way they and then wait a couple of days for that to clear. That'd be one way you could break the brood cycle while in the hive not splitting it from numbers.
So you can do that, or you can put a couple of strips of Apivar in.
Yeah, we're supposed to form it.
Yeah.
I think in the coming slides, it'll make a little more sense as to where that brood break comes in and is very important. So like certain methods they have to have access to bees, so that's where that brood break really helps for it.
All right. So a couple of different monitoring methods there. Like I was mentioning earlier, pick whichever one works best for you, but please pick and do something. So the sticky board method, it's just what it sounds like. You have a screen bottom board, you have this board that slides underneath there, has grids on it. Typically spray it with cooking oil or some type of oil so that the mites stick there. Leave it in place for 3 days, divide by 3 after you get it out. And so these are, once you divide by 3, since it's been in 3 days, then you have your 24-hour averages. If you have 8 frames or less than 20 mites, you're at your treatment threshold. If you have 9+ frames and hit a count of 40 mites or more, then you're at your treatment threshold. This is one of the least effective methods, but at least it's a method, because you're going to get things like ants that might get in there and remove some of the mites. You may have the bees take some of the mites out. So it's not one of the purest counts that you can get, but it is a method. Inspection. So I'm gonna point to Mike again on this. So what you do on this, you can perform this on drone brood, or you can perform it on worker brood as well. And what you do is you actually you have the brood frame, and you're actually uncapping the brood frame and taking your tweezers and you're pulling the larva out and looking for the presence of varroa mites on those. I got a kick last year. I just would sit and watch Mike do this for hours and hours. He was doing VSH essays. But anything you want to mention about this pupa inspection, Mike?
It's the most accurate and best test to see, what your mite load is. So when we do our feeder cleans to select, we find no mites that are reproductive. You can find a mite as long as it's not reproductive. And you're pulling off 200 purple-eyed pupa, from a frame, do the check. So you number the frames, or put a note on the frame and know which hive it goes to, and then bring them inside. I've got like little and my magnifying light things, and set it on a grafting frame, and we'll start fluffing out the pupa and seeing what we find. So when you score it, there's I don't know if I'm going to talk about that, but there's a method to score for your varroa sensitive behavior. So that's what we're doing in order to see, whether or not the queen can be used to make future.
Yep.
So by doing that, by reproductive or non-reproductive, since you're looking at a purple-eyed drone, which is a pretty mature drone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Life cycle is.
Correct. Correct.
If you find one mite, that means non-reproductive. If you find evidence.
You see eggs and baby mites running around. So just one single mite in there by herself, that's a non-reproductive. When you pull the people out and look in there, you'll see little white balls and back on the inside, not like in the front. In the front, it's fecal matter from the mite. It'll be in the back, and you'll see like a little white ball, or you'll see little white mites running around, and those are the babies. So you know that that's a reproductive. By the time you see purple-eyed pupa, if they have not intervened and pulled that mite out, then they're not expressing the behavior. So I was grafting from one of our queens the other day, and it was just happened. The first frame I was in a hurry, not gonna lie. So the first frame I pulled, I only had to do 30. So like there were plenty of larvae to graft. It was a mixed brood frame, and I noticed something uncapped. So when I had it on grafting, I pulled feeders out, and everything that was uncapped, I pulled out. It was still a larva. It was only probably about 10 days old. It was still kind of turned into a pupa. And every one that they had uncapped had a reproductive month. So you could see that I randomly sampled 50 other ones, so I wasn't being in a hurry to wasting an holiday food. And I pulled 50 other random ones from that same frame, and none of them had any mites. So only the ones that were uncapped on that side of the frame had mites. So, it's just I was just curious to see why they were uncapping and if that was going. So I'll do the same thing when I'm in the field. I carry tweezers in my little health thing. See they're uncapping, I'll pull tweezers out. You make it eye, the light's good. Just to see, okay, this is open mated, or this is one of the inseminated queens, and out running around in a full size hive. Is that behavior you express before we do our falls?
When you're doing assessments on it, you're seeing a lot of little queens or lights. You just go ahead and chuck those in the freezer, just to wipe them out, just.
No, they're gonna, you just don't let, yeah. Cause we want to see, like, the ultimate test is pressure. So you have a lot of mite drip, so, you know, you put a queen up, you know, you have a secluded queen and it's a hardwood floor, only, you know, keeps the mites low. You put her in a yard that is untreated with non-VSH stock, they're gonna get a lot of mites just showing up, you know, from jumping in or bees drifting in there. So it's not uncommon to have a hardwood floor, like, you'll find mites, like, it'll be up to a 2, 3, you know, in a mite wash, you'll find 2 or 3 mites in August, July. But what's important is by October, it's back down to 0. So that pressure will come on. You want that pressure. You want the mites one in the hive to see, are the bees gonna handle it themselves? And that's what you're looking. You want that expression to be taken care of. And it's like, most of, like, all the breeders, we don't treat it. And you know, that's something dumb, but you don't lose. Themselves, so they don't need that. I'm not a treatment free guy. Like, not putting those, like, not treat. I selectively treat. I don't treat anything that is either a breeder queen or a breeder queen that I may, you know, through crossing and finding good genetics to instrumentally inseminate queens. Like, we'll do that, and I don't treat any of those. They can't make it. I don't want it.
But I'll say also draw a distinction between treat and test. And so,
I test.
right, exactly. And that's the point, is that, you know, don't want anyone to walk away with, okay, I had a VSH stock, so I don't need to test. Yeah, you still want to test, you want to monitor those lows. Now, if you don't go over 3%, you may not ever treat, but you always want to know what your loads are. And so VSH doesn't mean you don't need to test. I just didn't want that message to get
Yeah,
lost
like an
and mixed
open
up in
mated
there.
VSH queen, you know, there's a pretty good likelihood you're probably gonna have to treat at least once a year, just because of the buildup, especially you want your bees clean going into the fall. Now, like the stuff that, you know, will instrumentally inseminate, I'll check them, but I rarely, if it's that high, I'm gonna get rid of her. She's not, I'll like keep her around, but we're not gonna use her to select stock from any breeder. And that's what I was saying earlier, it's not uncommon, as I wash, you know, early in the spring, 0, you know, as we're going through the year, you'll get up to 2 or 3 mites in a walk. Then it comes right back down again. And that's what we're looking for. And to Arthur's point, like, we're monitoring and checking. If I go in any hive, I mean, you can, I don't know, she's not here today, but Kim Bill's been looking, we're like, I'll wash a hive. And, you know, you get duds. I'll have one that'll have 30 mites in it. I just walk over to my truck, pull out the phone, put it in there, put it back together. And, you know, I just deal with them that way. So, you know, I'll pinch the queen first, build a formic on there, make a lid, note on the lid, and then I'll come back and replace it in 2 weeks. I'll put it somewhere. But yeah, you want to do.
All right, so back to monitoring methods here. So mentioned this earlier, the sugar shake roll. This is where you put your bees in a jar, put a half cup of powdered sugar in there and shake it gently and roll it around. Then you let it sit in the shade for 3 to 5 minutes. After it's sat for a while, you have a screen top on the jar. You shake that powdered sugar out onto a paper plate. Then you get a spray bottle full of water and you spray it. That dissolves the sugar and there are your mites, and you count your mite drop that way. So the sugar helps dislodge them from the mites as they're sitting in that jar after you roll it around and whatnot. Couple of, I mean, the positive of this is you're not killing your bees. So I know some people that really have a problem killing their bees in an alcohol wash, so you're not killing your bees. And if you're unfortunate enough to get the queen in there, don't ask me how I know this. At least you haven't killed her. So certainly a method that you can use. Alcohol soap wash. So just use either rubbing alcohol or windshield washer fluid. You know, they've got those Easy Check or something like Easy Check, whatever. Those little clear jars that you can buy from the bee supply places that have the lines in already. You know, you get your bees in there. Well, you have the alcohol in there already. Then you get your bees in there, swirl it around for a minute to kill any mites, and then dislodge them, and then you count the number of mites in the bottom of the jar. Very, very effective way. The downside is you are killing 200 to 300 bees. But as I often say, I would much rather kill 200 or 300 bees and have an accurate mite count than not kill 200 or 300 bees and lose my whole colony come fall or winter.
In the summertime, she's making 1,500 to 2,000 a day.
Yes.
And so you're talking about a very small percentage, you know, because ultimately what you're doing is you're saving that hive. And so you're saving the whole collective as opposed to losing just a few bees, really. In the whole scheme of things, you know, this time of year, a good hive that's gonna make honey is gonna have at least 40,000 bees in it. And so, you know, small crops.
You know, the question has come up in the past, about using ethyl alcohol and if that gets better kill rates, more accurate, mite counts. And the literature, will tell you that there have been some studies that have been done that says it does, but the difference is rather negligible. And they talk about the danger of using, you know, the ethyl alcohol versus just regular rubbing alcohol, and just everything I've read just encourages you to just stick with rubbing alcohol. So you may hear that, it's come up in the past, I thought I would bring it up. But, I always use just regular rubbing alcohol and I found that to be highly effective. Now, Tom, you've had some experience with some different ones, haven't you, or no?
I just, actually, Mike and I, we both started using the soap method just because it's super easy. And Mike kind of turned me on to the idea of keeping a bucket of water in the back of the truck. Cause then you can wash your hands when everything gets sticky. Makes my steering wheel's a lot happier after it started. It's a lot easier to just use the water with a drop of, Dawn in there and off I go. I think the key here on the testing method is whatever you do, follow that protocol every time and do it. Don't be in a rush.
The swirls important, get that right motion out of the swirl. Randy Allen's got like more information on this than we ever could read, so. I know they recommend going out and reading Randy Allen or stuff. He switched over to the Don, so.
He's tried every possible thing you can think of, and he'll probably switch over to something else. Who knows? You know what I mean? He's like, he never stops. Like, he's always learning, always experimenting, always trying new things, which is beekeeping. You know, that's really the jam there. It's just keep
like cups. He's got these like plastic cups with holes in them and stuff. He's got a machine that swirls for him. I mean, he's been pretty neat. I just normally find a new beekeeper and bring him with, and I let them be.
Do it.
Tim Bill has been my help for the last couple of years, at least one of my.
that sugar shake method. If you want to learn more about that, University of Minnesota Bee Lab, Marla Spivak's group has tons of videos on that. That's kind of their preferred way of doing it, if you want to learn more about that.
All right, so how many hives should I sample? So if you have an apiary with less than 10 colonies, you should sample each one of those hives, because each one of them can have different mite loads. If you get into, if you have an apiary that has more than 10 hives in it, then collect that at least from a minimum of 8 colonies. So you can see if you have multiple apiaries, you want to be sampling somewhere around 5% of your total colony. So as you get to the larger colonies, you'll have to sample all of them, but you want to sample at least enough where you know you have a reliable sample before you go and treat all of your hives without needing to. So here are the thresholds. So if you do your if you do your testing, get a threshold of 2% or less, not an immediate problem. Make notes in your notebook. Okay, I have a 2% threshold in this hive, and we're gonna talk about the importance of notes. We'll come back to that. Make a note in your notebook, you know, what those levels are. And I try to, I'm not perfect about this, but I try to number all of my hives. And so then after I test, I go back to my truck and I write down whatever notes I need from that hive that day, be it mite testing, be it mite treatment, or something else that I've done. So 2% or less, not an immediate problem. Kind of like Mike was saying, you could be at 2% 1 month, and maybe in a couple of months that comes back down. But what you want to do is you definitely want to monitor that monthly. So think back to what I was saying before about the life cycle of the varroa mite. If you have a 2% threshold in May with as much as that queen is reproducing every day. And if you've got 5 mated mites coming out each one of those cells, it doesn't take long for that to creep up on you pretty quick. If you're at 3%, you're definitely at the point where those mites are having an impact on your bees and on the hive. What you want to do is you have time, so you don't have to panic if you're at 3%. But at least what you need to start thinking about is, okay, when I pull my supers in July or August, I'm gonna have to treat because that's gonna keep going up. Again, if you're in May and you hit 3%, again, I would be testing monthly to make sure that doesn't get out of control. If you hit 5% or more, you're in trouble. Your bees are in trouble. And so 5%, I hit 5% in May, I hit 5% in June. I'm pulling supers, I'm putting those supers on another hive, and I'm treating that hive immediately with some type of appropriate treatment, which we'll get a little bit into the different types of treatments here in another slide or two. So anything on thresholds, James, Mike, Tom?
Okay, so
Okay.
you know, you're talking about fees. So what is 2%? What's 3%? What's 500? 5% on 300?
2% would be 6 mites, 3% would be 9.
Okay.
And in a shade. You see, one of the things that I'm sitting here thinking about is the dynamic is it's not the mites, it's the fact that the mites are feeding off of the bees, and whenever they're injecting themselves into that bee and feeding that bee, and if that mite is carrying viruses. And it's not, if the bee gets the virus, they're going to get it as soon as they're being fed on. And so then you've got these young bees in the hive that's going around and feeding other bees. They feed each other. And they also feed the larvae. So if you've got sick bees feeding other bees and other larvae, they're spreading that virus. And so that's where it multiplies even more so. That's why you've got mites growing through the year. And then in the fall, it's so systemic in the hive, because the viruses just get through them all. And that's why you have to keep, mite levels low, because you keep that virus down.
Yes, great point, James. It's about the viruses and less about the mites themselves.
Well,
All
Arthur,
right,
you said if you hit that level, you're taking the honey off, putting it on another hive and treating that hive.
yeah.
So you treat individual hives or do you treat the apiary?
So I would treat the individual hive. Because, so if I'm in an apiary with less than 10, so I've only got more than 10 hives in one of my apiaries, but apiary less than 10 hives, you're gonna wanna test each one of those hives, like we were talking about in the other slide. And so I'm gonna move those supers to a hive that's below the threshold, and then I'm just gonna treat that one hive. For mites, the hive that's above the threshold.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna try to move here these last couple of slides to talk about some other things as well.
We've got a window popped up.
Yeah, we know.
All right, so treatments, medicate when above the thresholds, not as a preventive measure. So we don't want to prophylactically treat our hives with miticides. And a couple of reasons for that. And probably the biggest thing is that if you use it, so it's kind of like if you don't have cancer, you don't want to be taking chemotherapy to try to prevent getting it. So a lot of these mite treatments are pretty harsh. And so you don't want to expose your bees to those types of treatments when that type of treatment isn't necessary. And probably one of the biggest things is, if we start to use some of these mite treatments as a preventive measure, when maybe our thresholds are lower, when the bees don't need it, then bees do start to develop a resistance to some of those chemicals. So it's very important to use the chemicals as directed when you hit the certain thresholds and to only use them for the amount of time directed. You know, a lot of these, as you all know, have like treatment periods with them. And if you go beyond that treatment period, the level of medication or level of chemical gets really, really low in the hive. And so when it's low enough that it doesn't actually kill the mites, then the mice can start to develop a resistance to it. So if you've got a 42-day treatment plan, it's important to stick with that 42 days and make sure that you get those mite treatments out of the hive in a timely manner. So these are some of the different categories. You have your synthetics. So the synthetic chemicals that you can use on mites. You got your essential oil based treatments. So your Apiguard, Apolite bar, and then you have your acids like the Formic Pro, OA, and Hopguard. So this just goes through, you know, your different treatment periods I mentioned before. What the different treatment periods are. Some of these, as you'll see, a real important thing to look at is like if there's temperature sensitivity or not. A lot of these, you'll see that there will be a minimum temperature that they're effective at. And in the case of things like Formic Pro, you'll also see a maximum temperature. And if a lot of times you exceed that maximum temperature, you're at risk of doing damage, further damage to your colony. So these are the essential oils. Personally, I use Apiguard, probably in my regular, not endorsing it, but I use regular Apiguard in my regular treatment rotation. I haven't used Apolite bar. Has anyone used that?
I have several
What do
years
you think
ago.
about it, James? I haven't used it before.
I used it late in the fall, and my bees seemed to get through the winter pretty good, but it was more of a cleanup kind of thing. It was really funny how much even stronger those little,
Mhm.
the little wafers were than even just using the regular Apiguard. I'm sorry, Apiguard.
One thing I'll say is this, the thymol that's in the Apiguard and the Apolite bar will also kill, it's one of the only treatments that will also kill tracheal mites. Now we don't have a lot of problems with tracheal mites around here, but if I'm treating for varroa, I know I can get a twofer. That's one reason I try to use this once a year if I exceed my levels, because I know that if I got tracheal mites in there, I'm killing those along with the varroa mites because of that thymol. Here are your acids, you know, very effective. I've used all three of these. That Formic, extremely effective. I really like Formic because it has a short treatment period. It can have a short treatment period. The thing is, you have to be careful again about that temperature. Because if it's too warm, you could potentially do damage to your queen. The other thing with formic acid is anytime you use it, regardless of what the temperature is, make sure that your hive remains queen right and your queen is laying, because sometimes she will shut down. OA, several different application methods for OA, extremely effective. That's one that I will typically use. So that is one treatment that I use, to go back on what I just said a couple minutes ago, prophylactic. And when I use it prophylactically, and I'll use it usually around New Year's. Well, I'll use it anytime between Thanksgiving and New Year's when the queen has stopped laying for the season. And I'll just zap the hive with OA, so that in an effort to kill any mites that are in that hive. But there's no brood in there at that point in time. And so I want to go in, kill all the mites, make sure my hives are clean as it goes through winter and comes out of winter. So I will use OA for that. And then finally, the Hopguard. No temperature restrictions with Hopguard. I don't know how many of you have used it before, but boy, is it messy. But it's effective, and it doesn't have the temperature restrictions that some of these other ones do. Now, the one thing that you'll notice up here is you'll notice there are different effectiveness ranges, and they are truly ranges. And that goes back to, I don't know if I made this point before or not, but it's an important point that that I fall down on sometimes today too, is, you know, you get in a rush and you're trying to get through all your apiaries and get through all your hives and do this and do that. And so you'll treat, and then maybe you forget to test. And it's critically important to, after you treat, to test again to make sure that your treatment was effective, because I found sometimes I'll treat and then test and maybe the treatment wasn't as effective as I thought for whatever reason. I'm still above the threshold and have to go in and treat again. And when I do that, I try to make note of what the first treatment was I used, what time of year it was, and all that type of thing, so I can learn from that for the following year.
Arthur. The club now, does have an oxalic acid kit that you can borrow from. If you're a club member, you can borrow it from the club member. And if I'm remembering right, it has the acid in there already.
Yeah, and it's also got a test kit too.
Yes, it has a test kit to treat the
It's
shake.
got an ask.
So if you're ever interested, a lot of times in PK's email, there'll be an email toward the bottom where you check it out. With me, and it'll show you how to contact me or email me or whatever. And you can loan it out. Usually it's a week. Sometimes if it's in a slower time, you may be able to get it for 2 weeks. Just make sure as soon as you know that you reserve it. That way we don't have any conflict.
The big downside to using oxalic acid vaporization, if you've got brood in the hive, you have to treat that hive every 2 to 3 days for 5 treatments. Because again, that mite is gonna come out of that cell, and it's not vulnerable to the oxalic acid in the cell. They're gonna come out of the cell, and within a couple of 3 days, they're right back into another cell. And so you have to get those mites while they're out. And whenever they first started talking about it, it's like every 5 days, wasn't it? And then they went to 4 days, and then 3 days, and they're finding that for it to really be effective, it's got to be a very short period of time.
Yeah, great point. So when you look at these different treatments, I talked about the downside of formic pro, and I don't mean to slam formic acid or formic acid. But one of the upsides of the formic acid is that's one of the few treatments that will actually kill the mice underneath the capped brood. So a lot of these other treatments, like the OA, to James's point, the hot guard, are only going to kill the mites that are on the bees. And so you still have all of those mites that are on the pupa that aren't going to be killed until they emerge. So that is one benefit of that formic pro. Yes,
On
BK.
oxalic acid, on the drizzle method, does that last longer than the vaporization?
No, it's the same amount.
Same amount?
It's harder on the bees, so you wanna limit that to once a year
Yeah.
per hive, and you don't wanna use, for a while, they're using sugar water, you wanna use glycerin. So you want something to make it stick to the bees, and they're using sugar water with it, and then the bees are ingesting it, they won't ingest it. You wanna use 5 milligrams, and you can use 1 milligram.
One of the more effective ways is Arthur was talking about doing the oxalic acid vaporization between Thanksgiving and the first of the year. Because the bees shut down and all those mites are paretic on the bees. And so you're gonna get at least 90% kill on those mites whenever you treat them. Also, if you do a split and you time that right, you're gonna have that split where it's going to be either broodless or have very little brood in the hive. And if you treat with oxalic acid during that period of time, you'll decimate your mites there too.
18 days after you make sure you set the cell in, because you don't want to do it on a split, and that's when I'm gonna use your. It's a lot easier, you don't need equipment, you can make this stuff up.
All right, questions, comments? All right, I put this slide in there for Tom. Tom, you saw him yell at me about sanitation all the time. So, this is, I mean, it's a good practice and a common courtesy, especially when you're going around with your fellow beekeepers, helping them work their hives and make sure that you're, practicing sanitary, practices. So, clean your hive tools with alcohol and or a flame between apiaries. Ideally, what I'd like to try to do, so, if you go out and work bees with Tom, Mike, or I, you'll go to the apiary and you'll see a couple of hive tools just sitting there in each apiary. And so those are the hive tools that we use in that apiary. So we're not taking them from one place to another, getting cross contamination. If you can't do that, do try to clean your hive tools. wear disposable gloves if you can. I know not everyone is comfortable with nitrile gloves, but you know, I mean, we all have those goat skin gloves, and I'll wear those when I get into a really nasty hive. But boy, they get grimy pretty quick. So I tell you, from a disposable glove standpoint, the thing I found to be most effective and most durable are those yellow kitchen cleaning gloves or yellow cleaning gloves. You know, they're thicker, and I mean, you can still get stung through them, but you don't get stung as often. And if you want to take them between apiaries and pour alcohol and rub them and then take them off and use them in, you can always do that. But definitely use something, you know, if you can, that you can at least sanitize between apiaries and between different visits. And then another thing I try to do, that's a good practice, is position your hives to reduce chances of drifting. So you can get mites, you know, in different hives as they drift from one to another. I remember not too many years ago, I had some hives out by mites, and I had them pretty close together, and I couldn't figure out the population in one hive was just going down, down, down. What was happening? I was getting drifting. So now what I'll do is I'll have my stand, and I'll maybe point one slightly this direction, and maybe one straight east, and then the other kind of southeast, just to help the bees identify their home hive a little bit better.
Is that,
Or
anyone
easier.
tried nitrile gloves over their goat skin?
I do. Then I changed the nitrile between apiary.
The club apiary, we require that you use the club hive food and latex if you come out.
All right, so those are, that's everything that I had on mites. So before we pivot, any other questions or comments around mites?
I'll make one. I had a good, bad, and the ugly house story. Went in and Margaret saw it and opened it up, and the roots all chewed open, and I was kind of like, okay, this is bad. And then as I get looking at the frames, there weren't just a few mites on there, there were hundreds of mites on there. I could see that many, I'm kind of like, oh, this is really ugly. What am I gonna do? So I threw 2 former crows on, sealed it up, and checked 3 weeks later, and they were great.
We think that one.
Yeah, I just, it was, it ended up good. It was really ugly to see that many mites in a hive, just hundreds. I've seen a few with the naked eye. It wasn't a walk. This is naked eye, and I'm kind of like, oh, this is really ugly.
What's pretty cool is throw a sticky board underneath there after you put that former on. You'll be wild. You hear them ring.
Yeah, you know, I was kind of like, what do I have to lose here throwing the former crow on? And Barb saw that.
All right, a couple more things want to touch on real quick. One of them is, well, wax moths have been my nemesis the last several years, and they have ruined I don't know how many of my frames. And now that we're getting to the point in time of year where there's gonna be a problem again. And what I try to do, well, one, I didn't mention this before, but this goes without saying, is I think the number one thing you can do to help your bees with any type of pest or any type of disease, it comes down to nutrition. So in the spring, make sure you're feeding your bees. In the fall, make sure you're feeding your bees, because those strong hives can fight off clearly a lot more pests and a lot more diseases than a weak hive can. But wax moths I tell you, they're awful in certain years. 2 years ago, they were terrible. And so what I started doing was using the paramoth crystals as soon as I take my honey supers off. And what you can do is stack your honey supers. I think you can go, it's either 8 or 10 high, I can't remember. But then you put a paper plate on top of the top super, put a couple of tablespoons of these crystals on there, you put a lid on, and it keeps the moths away. The downside to it is that you have to replenish the crystals every month or so, because they do tend to disintegrate over time. But paramoth is very, very effective. And I know Mike tried it this year, and I think you're happy with it too, Mike.
Correct, yeah, I use like a feeding shim, that's what, you know, to get a little bit of spot for the paper plate on the top. But yeah, it's is very effective. Like I've gone in and seen like dead moths on the paper plate, like
Yeah.
they've gotten in there and died, so.
Like a paper plate or a couple.
Just a regular old, I don't know.
Regular picnic plate.
Yeah, yeah, definitely recommended. I think we went through like, it's
We went
like
through-
2 pound, 5 pound, and like 5 gallon, I think it was 5 gallons.
Yeah, went through a lot of it. The other thing is there's this new stuff that's been out for, what, James, 3 years?
2 years. I've
That,
used it for two.
that 402, so you want to talk about
BT
that?
stuff.
Yeah,
Well, basically, anybody who gardens, you know about it's not a pesticide, it's a bacteria that attacks, some of the worms that'll get on like your, cabbages, things like that. And they just call it BT. There's a certain type of BT, and I didn't think to
yeah,
bring that.
B402 Sertan.
Yeah.
You can
Is
see,
it herbicide?
Well, it's a BT, and basically what it is you can just, I take just one of those little hand sprayers, pump sprayers, and I mix it up and, I just take and I coat all of my hives, my hive bodies, or I'm sorry, my frames. And then I'll stack my boxes back and forth so they've got enough airflow, so they'll dry out and they won't mold. But if you coat that nicely with that, it's worked for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worked.
so you can see it in like if you get, bee culture, you'll see it advertised in there, they sell it. But yeah, very, very effective.
Yeah, now I just get it off Amazon. I look on there and I find the right type and you can get it cheaper.
Okay, there's
What's the
BT.
type?
There's bacteria.
Well, BT is kind of a generic term for a specific type. And
Yeah, I'll send it to you, PK, and you can send out an email. It's B402 Sertan is what I wrote down.
Okay.
But I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Okay. One thing I say about wax moths that, I've read a number of times over the years, so. And I did this just the other day. I was in a hive again, I was in a hurry, and I'm scraping comb off the top of the frames and. And then I scrape some more comb and I flip it off into the weeds. And that's not a good thing to do. Because basically what you're doing is you're becoming wax moths. And so if you want wax moths in your apiary, throw that wax around there and you're sure to attract them. So, so as small as it might seem, just have a can with you when you're working your hives and put that wax that you scrape off in that can. And take it someplace away from your hive and dispose of it properly. The other thing that, throwing that wax around can sometimes do is, if you throw wax and it has honey on it and you get certain animals, don't you, Mike? That like sweet things, yeah.
That's how I know.
Yeah, they wreaked havoc last year, so important to take that wax away. It might be some of those things that seem small, but can, really be significant, because once you get, as many of you know, once you get those wax moths going, they can be a booger to deal with. Next thing, just, small hive beetle. That's another thing that I just don't like, small hive beetles. Now, what I have found is that when my hives are in sunnier locations, I tend to have less of a problem with small hive beetles. There are several different products out there now. Of course, I've used the beetle, the beetle traps that you fill with cooking oil and put between the frames. Those tend to be pretty effective. What I've run into on those sometimes is the beetles will just go underneath the edges of them and hide from you once I open the top, and I have to squish them anyway. The thing I like to use the most personally is the towels. So they have the towels, you can cut the towels into strips and typically place in each corner of the hive. And I usually just get unscented Swiffer sheets because they're readily accessible, they're cheap. They do sell special beetle towels if you want to go that route. But I found those to be real effective. Put those in there, and then as they fill up with beetles, just pull them out, throw them away, and put another towel in there. They have some different devices now. Some that go on the front of the hive that are supposed to help with hive beetles. I've not had any personal experience with those, so I can't really speak to them. But another thing that I use if I have problem with beetles, and this is for beetles and ants, is I'll use diatomaceous earth on the ground around, my hives, and that, I found that to be, pretty effective as well. So I don't know, any other comments or ideas, experiences with beetles?
I've heard two things. One is, Grub-X. Grub-X is a product that will kill grubs in the ground, which will kill your hive beetle grubs. And it does not affect the bees. It doesn't even affect bee larvae. They found, and you can, if you want to, you could take some of the Grub-X and soak into some of your, the pollen, sub, and take it and make a thinner mixture and put it down inside your beetle, your hive beetle. Beetle Barnes is one of them. There's another product. Yeah, you can put it down in there. And what happens is the pollen sub, it attracts them and then they eat it and the grub-X kills them. That's one way, the only way. Another thing that I found, and I haven't been able to try this yet, but, bees have been found to be very tolerant to very high levels of, what stuff we've been putting on the dog's leg? Peroxide, very strong, like 10% peroxide. They can handle high percentages of peroxide. The beetles can. And so I had this idea, it's like, well, why couldn't you just take a bottle of peroxide and a spray bottle and you see them on your lid and just start spraying? And I don't tend, where I'm at, I don't seem to have a whole lot of problem with beetles, and so I haven't really tried that method. But you know, if you have, that kind of thing, it is possible to do it because that peroxide, just straight peroxide will hard to use a bit.
I
Okay.
have this, a pair of the small needle nose, bent nose pliers, and I got a very satisfying crunch when I get it. Oh, I'm good.
There you go. More than one way to skin a cat.
And also, I'm sorry, the thing with the Grub-X, you can also do with the Grub-X is you can treat underneath your hives with the Grub-X. So any of the hive beetles that do go down into the ground and pupa, it'll kill. And it will not affect the bees. It's not toxic to the bees, not toxic to their larvae. And so you can treat the bottoms of your hives underneath your hives with the Grub-X as much as you want. And it won't hurt it a bit and it'll kill all the hive beetle larvae.
I only get my Swiffer sheets I got.
All right, next thing I just mentioned quickly that, many of us will deal with at some point in time and is nosema. So, you know, nosema is a gut, basically an overabundance of bacteria gets into the gut of the bee and causes it problems. Nosema will reduce the lifespan of the bee by anywhere from 50 to 75%. So, you know, once your spore levels get to a certain amount, it gets pretty critical to treat it. The tricky thing about nosema is you're gonna have nosema spores in just about every hive. It's when they get to a certain level that they make the bee sick that it gets to be problematic. What I would like to do is at one of our future meetings, I would like to do a nosema test. It's one of the things that we learned in class, and what you do is you basically just take a sample of 15 bees from a hive and take a mortar and pestle and grind them up. Add half ounce of water to it, and then you take 3 samples of that water. So you're gonna take 3 views. You need a microscope, obviously. And once you put it under that microscope, 400 power microscope, you can actually see the nosema spores on that slide. And then there's a threshold that once the spores exceed a certain threshold, you wanna go ahead and treat them. So one of the things I've gotten into the habit of doing over the last 3 years or so. So, you know, when you have nosema, I mean, everyone's probably seen it where you have the streaks on the dark streaks on the front of the hive. And then you'll have a lot of time the streaks on the frames and whatnot. Well, by the time you get that level of streaking going, you got a pretty serious problem going by that time. So I've done samples before where I've hit the treatment threshold and seen no visible signs of, no phenol within the item. So we can hopefully do that here at one of these meetings. I think it's pretty interesting, but, something important to watch out for. And if you do get to the point where you're seeing that streaking, it's real important to treat for it. They do sell, Fumidil. That's a very effective treatment for nosema, and something that I typically encourage people to keep on hand, because there will come a point in time where you're gonna need to treat your hives for nosema.
I committed you to that, Arthur. I already promised.
Thanks, Tom.
Where do you get the bees?
We said that last year.
Where's the best place to get the bees to sample when you do the treatment? Or is it not? Random off brood frame or?
I typically pull them off the brood frame, yeah. So pulling the nurse bees off is what I try to do. Now if I can't, I mean, if there's not much brood in there, then I'll just get them from wherever, but I typically try to pull the nurse bees off. Yeah. All right, yes.
I've only had bees for a couple of weeks. Do I need to start, and they're new hives, new bees, new everything? Do I need to start testing for stuff right away or later in the year?
So, I could answer that a couple of ways, and there are probably gonna be 10 different opinions in this room. If you have a package of bees that you get, where they packages or nukes that you started.
Loose, I mean, in a box and frame and.
Okay. So because they were nukes and you had cat brood in there and everything. Well, let me answer it this way. Even if you just had your bees for a couple of weeks, is it critical that, is it as critical that you test now with someone who has an overwinter hive? Probably not. The fact that you have a nuke as opposed to a package, and so you had cat brood in there and everything, you have a higher likelihood of having, a higher light count potentially. But at the end of the day, the way I would answer it is, thinking back to what we talked about, getting into the habit of where you're comfortable, testing your bees regularly for mites is a good habit to get into. And so I would start the test just so that you get used to it, you get comfortable with it. Now, your first several tests, you're probably going to be, well below any threshold where you need to be concerned, but at least you're that much more comfortable and familiar with going through the process. So that's how I would answer that question. Other thoughts on that?
I mean, if you just had like a 5-frame nuke that you just put in for a package, like you said, you only have to use for 3 weeks. Like, did you get a nuke or did you get a package? She got a nuke.
She got
At least where you did your first one. Yeah, I'm with Arthur. At least my implement. I normally use like June 15th would be the first time I might want all my stuff. So I'll do it June 15th, July 15th, August. I do everything based on like personal.
Yeah.
Basically, and then you kind of adjust, so like, when your beekeeping calendar starts in August, that's when the calendar kind of starts.
So yeah.
So actually, that's a good point. So the reason why we do this meeting here about mites, is we usually shoot for this about June, so that you can take action in July. So if you think back from frost date, it's like October, 2nd week of October. So if you go back 3 cycles of bees, that's 21 days times 3, so 63 days. That'll put you like really August. So like what we've kind of started doing is when we pull honey in July, when they go into the dirt, is we'll treat them at that time. And that way we know that those bees are being clean and healthy to go into winter, so that they're building healthy, strong, fat bees for winter. It's just kind of a habit. It's like if you know about it early, you can take action. Now you have to go back to Arthur's slide here about which ones you can use under which temperatures and stuff like that. There's no one that works all the time. You kind of gotta pick and choose depending on the situations. But actually, if you want to reach out to me, I'll come over. I'll show you how to do that in my watch.
And as you're doing it, Again, to reiterate, you don't wanna use that same chemical all the time. You wanna switch out your chemicals. And just as a, this is something that I wanted to say. I've been doing beekeeping, I think, 8 or 9 years now. I think it's 8 years. Okay, so we have last year and the year before, okay, are my two problem, the years I'm talking about. The 3 prior years, I got all of my hives through because I was very militant about treating my bees. I treated my bees at least 3 times a year. And for those 3 years, I got all of my hives through. Not last summer, but the summer before, I got a little lazy and I didn't treat as much. And I got away with it that fall. My bees got through, all my bees got through again that year. But mites and mite problems are also accumulative. So this last spring, not this year, but the year before, there were more mites in those hives coming into spring. So I had more mites in the hives and it bit me last fall because I lost half my. Because I got lazy again. I got lazy 2 years in a row. That's why it's very important to get your mite levels low and keep them low. Because if you get them low and keep them low, you'll put time out.
Yeah, that's.
I bought 3 packs. And I bought some.
That's for real.
And that's the truth. If you get your mites low and keep them low, you'll have. Yeah, that's.
Honey sooner in the spring if you have a little winter baby, and if you're putting it in package.
Yeah, you'll make way more honey through the season if your mite load is low. Cause the bees they're strong.
Yeah.
They can do more.
They're
Like your
healthy.
bees they'll build stronger.
Yeah.
They'll bring in more honey. They'll thrive a lot better. They'll be able to deal with other diseases better.
Yes, it does.
Like Arthur said, nutrition is, in my opinion, number 1. Number 2 is keep the mites down.
Yeah, keeping those viruses out of your hives will keep them. And like you said, keep them healthy. It'll keep them much more dynamic. They'll build broods so much faster. You can just tell, once you work with your bees for a while. Last fall, I could tell my bees weren't healthy. I had problems last fall on them.
Yeah,
And it was too late.
saw somebody post on, I don't forget if I'm sorry to turn here, but on our Facebook, I think it was on our Facebook page, somebody commented, it might have been on the Peoria Club, about that they had 2 hives with European foul brood that crashed in a matter of 2 weeks. Boy, that's awfully odd to see EFB this time of year. I wonder if it came in on something or what. Usually EFB hits when hives are in trouble. It'll hit when nutrition's down, when they're getting hammered by wax moths and mites and they're just unhealthy. Then EFB just hammers them. But it's really bizarre to see that in the spring when bees are building real good and nutrition's good and there's lots of food coming in, but if you get ahead of it now, you'll have a much better for sure. That's why we talk about this early, so you can come up with a plan. Arthur said this in the past, is like build your mite plan now.
Mhm.
And know what to do when.
Yeah, it's a great point. I remember Mike and I have conversations every winter, putting together a mite plan for the next spring and summer. So I mean, we've got it written down already, the testing and the treatments and what chemicals and all that good stuff. And Tom was gracious enough to load us up with some treatments. So yeah, gotta think ahead and try to stay ahead of it. Is there a question back there?
Yeah, we don't have the inventory. I mean, so we're second year. Should we have APR and everything just sitting in a cabinet in our garage ready to go, or would we?
No, because all of those chemicals,
Expire.
most of them are
Some
time
of them, yeah.
sensitive. Now, APR does have a long life. That's one of the nice things about APR is, they have quite a long, expiration date. Formic Pro is pretty good. It can be up to, a year plus. APR is very sensitive to that. One of the things I wanted to say is to be kind of, Apivar has been showing some weakness in the sense that I've seen, on the internet, I tend to, or YouTube, I tend to watch, some of the commercial beekeepers, and there's been some problems with Apivar and not being as effective. Now, I did use Apivar this spring, and I noticed that the formulation of the strips were different. And before, you'd almost have to have a pair of pliers to pull those things apart, and this year they just came right apart. And then you could tell the design was different. And so I don't know if they've improved the efficacy of the product again. And I just used it, this spring to basically help to clean up and get things going this spring. And so I don't have any solid evidence of that it's helped it any, but there is evidence out there of commercial beekeepers, guys with thousands of hives that were having problems with it. And so, use that product, carefully, I guess, or do your own research.
So what I would say if you, a couple of years in, probably have a handful of hives or so, I would at least have a plan. So start thinking about, okay, what if I test in July and I'm over my threshold, what am I gonna use? So that if you go, boom, I know what I'm gonna do, and you're not sitting there panicking, trying to figure it out. Cause John Hill does a good job of keeping, at least a reasonable amount of things in stock. You can probably go up there and get whatever you need. But I would at least have that plan in place. And don't feel like you have to have this big inventory of stuff. Yeah.
I always have formic with me, like I just used my last one. It's in a behind. I'll go buy just a 2-pack of the formic. I'm gonna use ApiGuard this fall, so I already have my ApiGuard ready to go for that. So I just like to have this stuff out, and then in the spring, we typically use ApiGuard. One thing on the ApiGuard, if you pull the strips and they're not discolored, there's a pretty small chance that it wasn't a very effective treatment, because they need to be touching that and spreading it, right? So if they're not discolored, if they look new and shiny, you may not have gotten like as good of a treatment maybe as you want. I've noticed that with some of my hives, when I pull them out, they look brand new. I'm not sure the efficacy of that treatment was probably what I want it to be, so, I may monitor that a little bit, so visually, if I'm looking at open cells as the bee emerge and I see mite fecal deposits on the front of the cells and a lot of the cells, then I know my mite count is probably higher without having to walk. And just overall health, you can just kind of get a vibe that, the bees are all waxy looking, look very bright and shiny. So on those times, maybe I'll come back and hit them with a formic or a different treatment a little earlier in the spring when I have a lot of work. Back on more efficient and pretty good at having.
I think so.
You see your root patterns are starting to disintegrate. If you have a good flow, they have good nutrition, and your root patterns get real spotty, and it just looks like, almost half the cells are open. If you look in the front of open cells, you'll see a little bit of white towards the top, you'll see like white dot that's liquid might matter. You see a lot of that, and the brain just look kind of gross. I'd walk that except
There is also another product getting ready to come out. It's extended, release oxalic acid strips, for hives. I just talked to John Hill today, and he said that it is not legal in Illinois yet. He doesn't know when it's gonna get legal in Illinois. It has become legal federally, and now it's a matter of the states to adopt them, but they're very much like a hop guard, where you're just putting it in there and you're leaving it in there. And it's I brought this with me. The shape will be different, but this is kind of like a sponge. And what some people are doing is they're taking oxalic acid and glycerin, and impregnating, basically creating this mixture and making it wet with this. They're putting it in the hives. And they've been doing it. That's what they've, Randy Oliver's the guy that's really been heading this whole thing. He's been working on it for years. And so now this new product is a strip that's gonna go down into it, similar to Apivar. And it'll just stay in the hive, and it's not something that's gonna kill all your mites. It's gonna keep your mite levels down. It's not gonna give you a 90% kill or anything like that. It's gonna keep the progression and the growth of the mites I'm not sure what the percentages are, but it will decrease the growth of the mites by having those. And it's, like I said, it's legal federally, and hopefully Illinois.
James, mind if I pass it around?
Yeah.
Yeah, so keep in mind, like what Mike said, about 18 days after a cell is when you treat with oxalic acid, so a lot of people have been having swarms in their hives, so when your hive swarms, that's an excellent time to count down
18 days.
and then yeah, it's even just a little bit longer than 18 days, but 18 days you should start to be broodless for sure.
Yeah.
And you can hit it with oxalic acid, you can go borrow the kit over at Advanced Computing, you know, it's there for free for club members, go borrow that. Or like I was talking with John here, he had a little accident and wound up pushing the queen. So it's a great time for him to treat with oxalic acid. Plus we do brood, we were talking about brood breaks. You have to understand how each of these miticides work. And kind of wrap your head around it. I can't remember them all, so I always have to Google and remember which one for which temperature, which one for this, or which one can have supers, which ones can't have supers, all those other things, and remember what I can use when. There's some pretty good charts that show some of that to you. But that plan is so critical, being ready to know, so like, when you ask something to have on hand, I think a good one is oxalic acid for sure, or at least, you know, reach out and borrow the club kit if you don't have one. It's an investment to buy a vape setup, so, if you can borrow that one.
So one of the effective ways, and I think Mike touched on it some, is, let's say, one of the things that I've done in the past with Arthur in July after the honey flow is we would come in and we would split down my hives. That was one of my mistakes last year, is I didn't do that, and they all went swarm crazy. But whenever, let's say in July, you go into those hives and you split those hives down after a honey flow, if you've got a mass of bees, you can take and pull all your cat brood out of that hive and drop it into nukes and have only open brood in that hive, and then treat that hive with oxalic acid. And that's gonna clean up those mites a lot in that hive because you have no cat brood in the hive. Then you're gonna take and put you a cell in the nukes that have all the cat brood, and by the time the queen comes out and she gets mated and you start to see larvae in that in that nuke, then you treat that nuke with oxalic acid and you decimate the mites there.
Yeah, so if you notice, like last month's presentation was on splits and how to do exactly what James just said. And this month is about mites, so if anybody wants to do that in June, July, August even, August is getting a little racy, but if you have a couple of hives, you can beef it up with some extra brood, or there's some juggling. If you're not confident enough to do it, reach out. We can help you with it, but we'll have cells and mated queens and all that stuff, virgins, whichever route you wanna go with that.
So Arthur, you said you and Mike had gotten together to put a plan together, for a couple of years. Would you guys have a sample one you could share with the club?
Can you still?
There's one of my, I like have a web page of a blog that has like what I'm gonna do all year. It's all based on the person and what I'm gonna do when, like what I'm gonna split, what I'm gonna do, all this stuff. The reason we go together is because like you buy the like the single things of the Apricot, they're really expensive, but we didn't have, each one of us didn't have enough hives to use the full pump. Or the full pump, well, between the two of us, we moved the whole pump. And the pump chain and you can't be the other people, like we can, you know, kind of buy the big thing and split it. The same thing with like the format, right? I have X amount of hives, he has X amount of hives, you get like the value cap, you know, the 2 boxes for John, we can use them all. It's just nice to coordinate too. The reason we started is because if you ever put on top guard yourself, just wear rubber gloves and old clothes, because you're just gonna be, it's like never sees, and you just get covered in this stuff. I'll never do this, like, you need to have one person opening the lid, and like the dirty person that's doing the hot guard. Just hit it in all nights.
And it doesn't go.
No, it smells delicious, but.
It's actually an acid from. Yes. Speaking of, speaking of European fall root, if you guys get to know me, you know that I'm real edgy, about a lot of things. Last fall, Bob Benny, which is somebody on the internet that I trust implicitly. He had heard about a product for EFB, which is essentially, it's canola oil, 1 gallon of canola oil, 200 milliliters of tea tree oil, 200 milliliters of eucalyptus oil, and 100 liters of camphor oil. And he basically was having just a few hives that were having this issue. I made quite a few copies if people are together. Or if you know each other and you can make a copy. I got 25 copies. And I broke it down to where the 1 gallon mixture is the full size recipe. I did one for pint and one for half pint. You can also do your own calculations to make sure I'm right. But whenever he had just a few hives that had EFB in it, and he was told by somebody else, that was another commercial beekeeper, said that this was effective. He put this stuff in his hives, and within 2 weeks, all evidence of it was gone.
The guy that I buy packages from treats 15,000 hives with that.
Does he? Yeah, and there's actually, if you go online, or on YouTube is where he's at. He put this out last fall, and there's actually a couple references in that video. I'll put that video on the webpage, on our SEGA page. There's a couple references in there that there is evidence that, that it is also effective in treating AFB. And I'm not sure, these were a couple, universities or something that, you know, from other countries, but they were finding that it was effective. And so I'm not endorsing that, obviously. The EFB is definitely an option. They treated it with this product, and then they also treated, they used one of the probiotic products out there. They've been using them last year, and they said that it was really working for their hives, these probiotics.
Yeah, they use the probiotics typically after they treat. So after they finish with formic and after they finish with some of the hard treatments.
They were just using it once a month and finding that it was, really helping. They said the hives just looked healthier. By putting that that probiotic in the hive once a month. And so, but that, yeah, this is, it's real easy to put together. It's definitely not toxic for the bees. And so, you know, it's not gonna hurt anything.
All right, well, I think that's all we have prepared. Any other questions on anything that disease related, any general beekeeping topics or questions? Go and bring up, yeah.
I think we did start 2 hives. I think one of our hives has like worms and beetles. I can't. Yeah, that's it. Can we treat for all 3 at the same time, or do we stagger the treatments?
So you can definitely treat for the mites and the beetles at the same time. The waxworm, do you have wax moths in your hives now?
Well, on our bottom grid, I found the larva and a couple live moths.
How I have treated them, wax moth, and I got out of it is, okay, I pulled frames that weren't brewed, threw them in the freezer for like 24 hours, and just kept on rotating them. Any frames that didn't have brood got frozen, and I was able to conquer the wax moth. That's what worked for me.
Yeah.
I'd say manage your space too. So like, make sure you don't have an extra box on that you don't need. Just make sure that the bees can manage that space for sure, that you have a ton of bees inside there, and that way they can control it and keep things clean. Get your Swiffer tomorrow, the dollar store.
Huh?
That's rough. You have a lot of drunk already? Cause they need to wax.
So is this an overwintered hive? These are overwintered.
No, they're new hives.
They're new, huh?
Are they new?
They are, no, a friend of ours, sucked them out of, a home in Springfield.
Oh, I don't know, yeah, you might wanna post some picture here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The new hive with all three of those going on is something unusual, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might get some pictures and post on the website like Mike said.
And so wax moth larvae, okay, have you ever seen the little larvae that people go fishing with? That's kind of the size you're gonna get, is gonna be a wax moth larvae, right? But, a wax, beetle larvae is much smaller.
Long and
You
skinny.
couldn't put that on. And so if all of the larvae that you're seeing is real small little larvae, real tiny little, then that's hive beetle.
They're big.
And so, okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, you got it.
Where are you located? You
There
want,
are two kind of wax moths, there's a big one and a small one.
No, that's just. That's every month. Yeah, those are just like.
All right, other questions, topics? Yes.
Just changes the PK.
Yeah.
You split the hive and then it swarmed,
Every single one of them. Yes.
only had one queen.
Yes.
Well, which, okay, I had split early all the hives.
Those are just.
And they requeen
Wow.
and then split after they requeen.
They formed that main queen.
Yeah, but, I think what he's asking is, did you leave the queen in the
Anytime I
parent
split, I
hive, or
put
did
the queen.
you actually moved?
And which hive swarmed?
A few of them.
The one with the new queen and the one with the old queen with both swarmed.
Sometimes it's hard to keep track of. Who really-
is this normal, Tom, to Arthur's notes?
Is this normal?
Yes, actually, the one that swarmed on me, okay, on my hive, two that swarmed on me were the original hive. I had moved to queen. It was
It can happen, so think about it this way. If you have a natural swarm, you're gonna have the mother queen lead with the swarm. And then if you say have 4 virgins running around in there, you can get a secondary swarm and a tertiary swarm. And so,
Yeah.
depending on how far along that hive was when she moved that queen, creating an artificial swarm, if there are enough virgins in there, very easily could have had
Yeah,
additional
that's true.
swarms.
Yeah.
She said it happened to all of them.
well, let me put it this way, I've seen 12 swarms like that.
Wow.
How's that?
She's got a lot of old. She's got a lot of timber.
Yeah.
So that's why when
Beekeepers
you,
down the street.
Yeah.
whenever I do a split, I don't always get them, but I try to always check for virgin first. And then I try to knock all of the cells off except for 1 or 2. Cause you think if you leave, 6 cells in there and you create the artificial swarm, you're gonna get a secondary swarm at some point in time, more than likely. So that's why you gotta split, but you also have to still manage that mother hive for those virgins. Does that make sense?
But hard to stay ahead of.
The time situation is because I split way early. And what is it, it's almost 40 days before you get.
If you split way early, you're probably ready to split again.
You seen one? I did. Yeah.
But they didn't swarm then because I took the queen away from them.
There's a lot of.
Yeah. And you probably got it.
That's a very. Yeah.
All right, PK,
Yes, ma'am.
time, I don't know what you.
Time out, okay. Like I said, Sunday is highway inspection work day out of the club. Then it takes a break. Take your name tags and, slide the cord inside the little plastic thing and throw it in the box. And I'll have it next week, next time.
I'd like to thank Arthur for his time tonight. We'll be welcoming you back, October 22nd for, the SEMA test.
So, thanks for letting me know.
We're good there, Arthur.
Yeah. So, I would send you. All right, we'll do that. Oh. You've got told this. I'll work.